Hey guys, and welcome back to the 1v1 podcast. I am your host Vlhadus, and today I have an amazing guest, someone that I've been wanting to speak with for a long time, and I have nothing else or nothing more to thank than X Sturmicide, who's a part of the Burning discussion, who actually finally nailed this dude down and got him on the show. And I have Enrique from TripleBTitles. What's going on, man?
What? Not much. Just having a nice 4-day weekend.
Oh, dude. I know Labor Day weekend has been so good for me so far. I had a wedding yesterday that I was in. Had some really good times yesterday. It was all it was amazing. Friday was really great too at the rehearsal dinner. And then today I'm just chilling. I have, talking to you, just gonna chill out, play some probably World of Warcraft Classic. Tomorrow probably gonna do the same. So it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. But I guess the one thing I really admire about your videos, especially from your YouTube channel, TripleBTitles, and if you haven't checked out his content, you really need to go check out his content. He has really awesome content from, I think, just a different side of perspective, right? Because Enrique, you are a developer, right? Like you're an indie developer. You've created games. Can you explain like what titles you've created?
Well, I mean, it started off with I'm gonna call it a space shooter RPG. It's called Ring Runner.
Is that available on Steam?
It is. All of these will be available on Steam. It was initially designed in XNA, which is for Xbox Live Arcade. And during the development of that, Microsoft said, we're discontinuing that. So it got deprecated and we never even released it on Xbox. But yeah, it's a little space shooter, sort of Newtonian physics, twin stick kind of thing with a lot of story, a ton of customization. It has its own mobile-like thing. It's multiplayer, co-op up to like 5 people in like zombie horde mode. It's got a ton of stuff. We threw like the kitchen sink at it. So that's Ring Runner. And then we created Pop-Up Dungeon. Pop-Up Dungeon was a very long development cycle, 7 years. Basically, it's a game creation system. So you create your own tactical RPGs with their own story. You can import images, sounds, voice. We got to work with a lot of great voice actors for that project. Matt Mercer, John Delancey, which you may see behind me there, did Q from Star Trek.
Nice.
It was a bunch of people like Ahmed Best, the guy who did Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars.
Oh, wow.
Lots of great voice actors there, so you can bring your own flair to that game. It's basically a game that allows you to create any ability, but it automatically balances it. So everything is atomic, and so if I said something like, I'm going to deal 10 points of fire damage, and then I add a negative to me, like I snare myself, I don't move as much, it'll do 14 points of fire damage, that kind of thing. So
Nice. Okay.
you create your own characters, your own adventures, etc., etc. And now we're working on Aces and Adventures, which is basically a deck builder, single player, something in the vein of Slay the Spire, but it uses poker cards for things like attacks. So you're not just doing 5 points of damage, whatever. It depends on how many cards you throw at them. So if I throw an ace high at you, I'm doing 1 point of damage. If I throw a pair of 8s at you and you can't beat it, 2 points of damage. 3 for triples, 5 damage for 5-card hands. And then you have a whole deck that is helping you build things like either wilding things or increasing the damage that your spades are going to do, all kinds of stuff. So there's 5 different classes, 13 campaigns. And that one's been a much shorter development cycle, 2 years long, and it's going to come out early next year. We have I guess I can say this. I can't say the full thing because I'm still not allowed to, but we have a publisher, which will remain unnamed for now. And so that announcement is coming out soon.
Wow, dude, that's a whole lot of information. And honestly, like, I really want to play that 7-year project, because the one thing is that, like, I think a lot of gamers truly don't realize the momentous task of making a video game. I mean, I don't know if you can agree with me on that, but I mean, even if we just talk about outside of MMORPGs, like, I mean, to code the back end, and I'm sure how many people were on that project with you doing it, if you don't mind me asking.
So that's part of the problem. The way that we work is my brother is the programmer. He handles all the what you would call like engine stuff. I mean, it's made in Unity, so it's not like we're starting from scratch.
Right.
But in essence, we build an engine on top of Unity, and we still use that engine even for Aces and Adventures. So it's just like a bunch of reflected UIs that automatically generate based off of the data. So that means that you don't have to go and generate the UIs. They self-generate from the classes in the programming. So then I can come in and just code with it, not code, but script within that. So I'm scripting things so that they can be automatically translated, so that they're putting the abilities together. I'm putting together all of the atoms of the abilities and creating them kind of like, chemistry sort of. If you put the wrong atoms together, it explodes. And so
for sure. It's sort of like a custom engine, like sort of?
Yeah, it's like a tool. Let's just call it like a tool.
Like a custom tool.
So that took like 4 years to develop the core of that tool. So in that time, I was creating all of the 3D assets, the sound effects, and I also have a wife who works on all of the 2D art, so the card art and things like that, and the little cutouts and the character skins and all that. That's what she's doing. And so we were working 4 years kind of in the blind, and then the last 2 years, because then it released and we supported it for about a year, was basically just a bunch of putting the game together, creating the game. That's why when I see Ashes of Creation and I see that they have put so much time and effort into all of the art, and I know that he's talking to writers and he's talking to people all the time, then you know that what they have is something very similar to what we did, which is to have all of these pieces that can then be put together very quickly to form a game. So the game itself came together, like the core game came together for Pop-Up Dungeon in months, right? It just took a couple months to get something that was really playable. But building up all of the assets that then you put together, and to be fair, in that game it was procedural, so the computer's putting together the levels and everything in a papercraft style. You can look at it later. But the idea here is that they have a bunch of assets that they can just burst into the world and fill it very quickly. So you can go from barely playable to, oh, this is a pretty rich world in months, in my estimation, if they're going about it this way.
Right. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I see a lot of the times from people, and I think it's just ill-informed people, right, is there's the hype that goes with finding a game, right, and especially in this kind of stale MMO market. Naturally they want it as fast as possible, right? They're bored in what they're playing. They see this new shiny toy that's being developed and they just can't wait to get their hands on it. It's also the same thing that I've been seeing with Riot, and many people don't know when the actual inception of the Riot MMO has started to be created. Like, we don't know if it was when Greg Street came on the scene, which was in 2014. Maybe it was in 2016. Maybe they were trying to establish more of the world, getting all that stuff fleshed out. They could have literally been working on the game as long as Ashes of Creation has. But we all know that it takes, first of all, among like a huge cast of people, right? Like a bunch of different developers from all different walks of life, and it takes a vision to literally go and say, this is what we're doing, and just go full steam ahead. Because we all know that, especially with this other upcoming MMO, Throne and Liberty, the vision on that game has changed so many different times, which has caused it to be in this sort of like a development hell, of like almost 11 years. And so for me, when they pivoted into what we are now seeing, which was in 2019, I mean, I know they've done a lot of art. I know they've done probably a lot of like back-end coding when it comes to like creating the world, the dungeons, the raids, whatever kind of content they have. But it's from 2019 to launching in 2023. I mean, do you think that would have been enough time to really create a solid foundation of a game?
Are you talking about which MMO?
Oh, Throne of Liberty. I'm sorry.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely enough time
Okay.
if you had that clear vision. I think the issue is I don't know what that vision really truly is from what I've seen so far.
We all don't know.
With New World, when it was first coming out, it just seemed like you initially had the idea of it's a sandbox. It's sort of a survival sandbox. Go. And that wasn't going to be enough for a full-fledged MMO. If it was this sort of new definition MMO, like the MMO Lite, like if you're talking about like a persisted Rust, then okay, that would be enough. But I think that it takes something like the vision that Ashes of Creation does have, and they started with, to understand like where is this headed. That's the thing I'm always talking about, the sort of B value of the game, the thing that is not the gameplay, it's not the actual experience, but it's what makes your accomplishments within the world feel substantial. That thing there, the reason for playing the game, even like that thing there was very clear in Ashes of Creation. I don't know what it is in Throne of Liberty. I honestly don't know. Now, I haven't looked into it as much, to be fair, to Throne of Liberty,
Right.
but I never get a good feel for what that is.
Right.
And that's maybe because it is confused. They just like want it to be this, they want it to be that. They've changed it from this, changed it to that.
Right. I mean, I think in general, like I find it to be really hard in my mind to think that from 2019, okay, we're gonna kind of use as many of the art assets as we could from being a top-down kind of Diablo-esque, style game, and then now we're gonna make it into like the third-person MMO that people are used to. And I think the one thing that's always been very disappointing if you're going to take New World, right, is the game loops, especially the end game game loops. Like all you had in the very first month of New World was chest runs and dungeons, and it just wasn't. If anyone knew, there was no compelling end game waiting for you when you hit max level. And I always fear that so many developers are trying to create a really great leveling experience. They're trying to create this really pleasing world and these kind of ancillary game systems like dungeons and raids, but outside of that, they're like, crap, we've been focusing on all these other things that we forgot the game loops, the daily game loops that people are supposed to do every day. And now, because it's a games as a service, it's like, well, we have to give them that probably in our first major patch, or have like maybe one, maybe two things. And I think that's what always holds back MMOs, because I mean, MMO players literally devour content. Like we're these hungry carnivores of gamers, you know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of times I don't think the developers themselves know what exactly MMO players are really craving. You know what I mean? Like it's one thing to have a really compelling leveling experience, but we're going to go through that leveling experience as fast as humanly possible. Or even if we do decide to take our time, it's a finite thing. Once we're done, and all we have left are these game loops that are kind of waiting for us at the end. I think the one thing that I really look forward to with something like Ashes of Creation is because, and I think it's a worry that you have, which is so many systems that are relying upon other systems. But I guess for me, I see the kind of vision they have from like what Steven always talks about and how these systems actually do complement other systems. And we'll have to wait and see if it's a band-aid system, right? If it's just a system that is sort of needed to kind of help out this other system in a kind of crutch kind of way. But the way I kind of see it is it's more of like, with the caravan system, I'm really excited for. There's other systems that are going to correlate with that, like the corruption system, or the guild war system, or just the natural PvP system, the open world system. Like there's a lot of different things that kind of feed into just one system. But I guess my question to you is, like, from a developer standpoint, like, why is it that so many systems does scare you?
Well, simply because I don't think it takes a developer to intuit this, but that if it's systems driven, like I think I've mentioned this on the last burning discussion, but it was basically just stating that if I go into a place where there's a simple exploit, like it's just say that there's the corruption system, and I can run out and like dive in front of a boar as you're about to kill it, and you kill me instead, and I got you corrupted, but now I can come back and kill you. It's just some weird exploit, right? But if it's a simple exploit like that, and you rely on something like reporting the person or whatever, it just keeps the exploit intelligible to a very large amount of people. If you complexify this by adding a bunch of systems to it, first off, you can end up with something unfun. That's step one, right?
For sure.
But step two, and this is something that's almost impossible to combat, you're still going to have exploits, but they're going to be very complicated exploits now. And now nobody's going to, well, not nobody, because some people are going to benefit from them tremendously, but it's going to be a very small portion of the population. And now what you have is the person who is doing that kind of thing, like diving in front of a boar to get you corrupted to then come kill you, is doing this whole weird system that's getting them really rich, ruining the game perhaps, and you don't even know what's happening. You don't know why it's happening or how you can combat it. And so now they may start adding systems that reduce the fun. And this has happened before. I can't think of any exact examples off the top of my head, but I know this has happened before in games that I've been playing where they add this restriction. In fact, I've had to do it now that I think about it. They add this restriction to basically stop the 1% or less of players from destroying the game. And it makes the game less fun for 80% of players, right? Because
Right.
now something is a little bit harder, more complicated, or not as intuitive, whatever.
Right.
So that kind of thing is the problem. And when you're solving everything through systems, instead of just kind of eating the exploits at the lowest level, you're trying to either chase the dragon of no exploits, or you're going for really complex exploits. That's where you can get into trouble, in my opinion.
For sure. I mean, I think the one exploit that I keep thinking about in my head is from New World, because I think New World became a quite of a meme when it came to like system exploits, bugs. It was that full screen, or I'm sorry, the windowed thing where if you go to windowed mode and you click it and drag it over your thing, you were like completely invulnerable. Now, it was a really crazy bug. It was, really dumb, and I know a lot of players probably didn't do that. I've saw in the New World forums that it's like, I've never had this happen where someone was invulnerable. But then you had other exploits when it came to like the auction house, how to level like very quickly in New World with like the work orders or something like that. Like I never played New World, but just me watching like Josh Drive Hayes, Asmongold, a lot of the other YouTubers talking about New World's problems, the whole sausages, the pictures that they were doing inside the trade chat, just all these really weird things. New World basically just became a meme of it being so unfinished.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even though these things weren't exactly like, some of them were game breaking, but other ones were just so like to the point of someone like myself that, was kind of curious about New World, but then you just keep seeing issue after issue after issue after issue, that it just literally turns you off entirely to the project, which is something for myself. Like, I don't really care to play New World, but honestly, like, I looked at New World before and it just wasn't something that I would have been interested in anyway. My fear for Ashes is it being so system driven is that, and I'm sure you can probably speak about this as a developer, is because there is so many underlying systems on top of other systems, cross-pollinating with other systems. Finding a bug in that, just from a layman person, would sound horrendous. Like, how can you track a bug like that? Like, where is it being activated from on like the back end or the coding, or where? Like, how can we fix it? And that was the same problem that New World was going on to with their Lumberyard engine. It was really hard not to find the bugs. The bugs were easy to find, but because it was very spaghetti code, because Lumberyard's not really a great engine to work off of, it broke other things when we were like, okay, there's the bug, fix it, and then that broke 17 other things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, can you speak a little bit about that when it comes to...
I don't think that that's as big of a concern as you might think, in the sense of the type of system that we're talking about here.
Right.
The type of system that we're talking about here is something that should be easy-ish to debug, as in you'll be able to know where it's breaking. So there's more to debug because there are more systems,
right?
But and they are interconnected. So if one of them breaks, maybe the whole chain kind of breaks. But you should be able to track that pretty easily. Speaking from like how difficult it can be to track a bug, basically what the places that it's very difficult to do is something that is not replicable. So if it's an exploit, if it's something that like I can just go and like put a sausage in the trade window, take it off, put some gold, do this, and I can do it every time, that's very easy bug to find and fix, even no matter where it is in the system. It's this thing where like it only happens 1 out of 1,000,000 times, and you're not sure why. That makes it very difficult to find that error. So that's usually going to come down to the interaction of hardware and all this. So I don't think that that's as big of a concern for the team that Steven has assembled, really.
Okay. Well,
it's a design concern on my end, not so much technical.
Right. And I think from the design perspective, right, like I look at all of these different systems and I really, because in World of Warcraft, I don't know if you've played World of Warcraft, but people talk about systems in a very negative way. Like every time the word systems comes up, it's basically like a boogeyman word. It's like the Voldemort of World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And it's because I feel like there really isn't so many interconnected systems in WoW. It's the fact that this system is mandatory for you to participate in this unnecessary fun, like the system's fun, so we're going to force you to engage in it. And
Yeah.
I think it's those things that I don't really feel from Intrepid. I feel like there are systems you can participate in, but it's nothing that's forced upon you, like let's say the Covenant system in World of Warcraft and Shadowlands. That to me was a very unfun way to play WoW, because I
Yeah.
don't think they understand why WoW players play the game. Like what's their fun? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't.
It's tricky, and I've played World of Warcraft since I was actually one of the first 300, 500 people to play World of
Oh
Warcraft.
my god,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I was a guide for Sony Variant at the time for EverQuest, so I was actually able to work with Blizzard very early on in closed beta. This was before there were any skill trees, so it was just like basically you were playing Warcraft with a little guy, right?
Right.
And I actually thought it was so plain that I went to EverQuest 2, and that was a big mistake initially, but then I came back and played World of Warcraft for a very long time. But one of the things, like I remember going from, there was just World PvP to going to like Battlegrounds and all this, and these were suggestions that people were making. So some systems obviously are going to be a little bit more fun, and some systems are going to not be fun. The problem with being a designer and dealing with all this is when somebody's telling you, like, all the PvP players are telling you, hey, I can't find a good challenge. I have to go and gank like 20 people so that then people show up, and there's not really a reason for it, et cetera, et cetera. Can you please make a battleground or something where I can just jump in and have fun, please? And then they do. That's a gain, right?
Right.
Because like you said, you don't have to participate. If you want to PvE, then don't worry about PvP. You don't have to PvP at all, like at that time.
Right.
You just go PvE. However, when you're a designer and now you're seeing that, like you said, this is what the player base wants, but the player base is actually only 10% of players. And of course, as you probably know, they account for 90% of your game time. Like, so 10% of the players play 90% of the time. And yet that's not where your money's necessarily coming from. Some of it is with like microtransactions now, so I don't know the data there. But I know I was more familiar with the data back then. And so they were always, and this has been the constant case with World of Warcraft since Burning Crusade, in my opinion, but definitely on, is they were trying to somehow solve the problem of people just dropping out in the early teens. Like they wouldn't even make level 18, they just quit. That's 80% of your player base gone. How can we retain more players? How can we entertain the casuals? So a lot of their development and thought process is going into just doing that. So it becomes an issue of who are you trying to please? The thing that I like about Ashes of Creation, and particularly, Steven's approach, is he's kind of trying to please himself. He's not gonna go and try to please the 80 percentile. He's almost like not interested in that, which is wonderful, because that's how you're gonna get something that is gonna stand out. It's gonna be different because it doesn't have to be restricted by the same things that are forcing everyone in every other MMO and game to cater to the broad audience. So, for better or worse.
For sure. And I this is something I don't know if we can talk about next, but it's I've always tried to advocate for the casual MMO gamer, not to the extent of the detriment of Ashes of Creation. However, Ashes, in my opinion, does have far too many things that really lean into the hardcore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And all I'm trying to do is find a balance. Because as soon as I mentioned to like a friend of mine that has played MMOs for like 15 years, just as long as I have, and I say, well, Ashes of Creation is a PvX game, and they said PvX, like what is that? Because that's a very, no one's really heard that term. Like usually we can say PvP, PvE, whatever. But then I started mentioning that, well, there's not really like PvE servers like World of Warcraft, and they're like, oh wait, so that's like PvP then? Like what is that? And I'm like, yes, it's PvP. And but before I even say but corruption, they're like, oh no, I don't like PvP MMOs. You know what I mean? Right. And then you look at like Steam charts, you look at all of the PvP MMOs, like Josh Hayes made a whole video recently about how PvP MMOs don't succeed. You know what I mean? They're not something that the vast majority of players want. And that's literally my number one fear. Like I want Ashes of Creation to have a really established player base amongst like the people who love PvP. but again, that's really like such a small comparison comparatively to the overall arching casual player base, because
Yeah.
we do need them. People are like, all the hardcore like, oh, we don't need them. Well, does Mortal Online not need them? They have 2,000 people that log on a month into Mortal Online. Albion's probably like less than 20. New World, has 20,000 a month. Like, is that the kind of game that we want for Ashes? You know what I mean?
I mean, in essence, I feel that very conflicted about this for many
me
reasons.
too.
One is that yes, I would like to see a bigger player base, but something like New World, for instance, right? So
Right.
New World, if you play it, probably the entire. I've gotten to level 30, so I'm not really sure, but I haven't engaged in any PvP whatsoever, and I don't feel like I'm under any threat. It's a challenging game, but it's fine, So I think that it's possible, and in fact, that the video that I shot earlier today, which will be coming out later in the week, talks about this specifically, is that you can have and he said it many times, the risk-reward relationship. So you just need to make sure, and I'd go into more detail in the video, so I'll keep it short here.
No, for sure.
You just have to make sure that there's a gradation to that. So I can say, today I got a headache, I'm feeling cozy, I don't want to mess around, I'm just going to go out and chop some wood and go back into town. I don't want to get ganked. And so the feeling of mostly you're safe here, should be something that organically forms within the game. I described some of the systems that I would implement in order to make this happen, but in very simple terms, it's territorial corruption. So it means if I'm a citizen or a person who wants to be in good standing in this country, I'm not going to just randomly kill a dude that's just mining outside town. That's not going to work out. So not only am I corrupted, but also just a feeling of corrupted or flagged against as an enemy of this state, because that's what you would be. And it gives you that cool feeling of a wanderer or like a stranger rolling into town, and you don't know if they're going to be good or bad. So you watch them carefully, but eventually they turn out to be good or whatever. And so that kind of thing is what interests me, and I think that many of the PvP games have not done. They don't build the intrigue and the politics and the feeling of I'm in a space where my actions matter. It's just a gank fest most of the time. And Mortal Online is a great example. It's just a gank fest. Kill the person while they're naked. It doesn't matter. Just kill. And as I've said before, that's like the problem with that is that you might be adding the additional value, the B value to you, because maybe killing someone in Mortal Online feels like you're killing somebody in like Oblivion or like,
Skyrim,
Morrowind circa like 2006 or whatever.
Yes.
But the thing is, like, you're having fun because you're killing some naked dude that is raging on the other end of the screen. That's fun for you. But guess what? It's a negative for the system, and it's a negative for the game that now is going to devalue the whole game altogether. So ganking is a person-specific B goal that destroys the B goal or the B value of the game. And in the cases of the systems that are built in Ashes of Creation, hopefully it will preserve that value. Obviously, PvP, and this is the other thing I want to say, obviously PvP is not something that's niche at all. Like, you look at the Steam charts again, and if you don't look at MMOs, but you just look at games that, Battle Royale or something, they're the biggest game. People like to play PvP, but when you're putting them into the structure of this world that's supposed to enrich the experience and make it feel, or like Escape from Tarkov, as Roar was talking about. If you're putting the people into this complex world, they want to feel like the PvP is elevated, the meaning and everything is elevated, and it doesn't just become like, oh, now I have this really long cycle where I have to gear up and everything, and I don't want to use my gear because it could break or could get stolen, or it just has to be managed correctly. And that's another video that I want to create is making a full PvP MMO the hardest thing to do for humanity on Earth, right? Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to create basically what amounts to like what governments are trying to do, like regulate people, but these are savages because they have no remorse. They have no negatives
sympathy
that follow them outside of the game, so they can be the biggest jerks that they possibly can be. No consequences. That's the word I was looking for. And so you are having to create systems that govern the worst of humanity. and you have to manage their economy, and you have to manage all of these things. How do you do it? It's the hardest thing to do. No one has figured it out in reality, and so far nobody's figured it out in games.
Well, I think you made such a solid point, and I think that's the thing that gives me hope, because what I feel is going to happen, right? Like if we have, let's say, a year of testing, right, from Alpha 2, and people see because testing is always unnatural. It's very unnatural gameplay. You're not going to play a real live environment game the same way you would just a testing phase. And so what I feel is going to happen, and I'm just maybe just my hopium talking at this point, but I feel like Ashes is going to be a very rare breed of game to actually have probably an upward trajectory of population comparatively to a downward one. And the reason why is because in my mind, if everything could, and this is again could, be executed the way we're hoping and praying for, people will be very hesitant about Ashes. But once people actually see the natural progression of gameplay, see all of the different things that make the game feel rich and alive and visceral, and that old school feeling of like, this is meaningful content, like this is something that brings me joy, but it also has stakes, right? And that's the thing that I think a lot of people are really looking for. You'll have people watching a lot of big streamers, and they'll start noticing a couple of things. Oh yeah, they'll get ganked every once in a while, but these are big streamers. They're gonna really start noticing that there's not a lot of, let me correct it, there's not a lot of open world PvP that I personally am afraid of. And I think once they really see that there's people just passing each other on roads, just letting people mind their business, once they see the kind of peace treaties or the kind of alliances that can happen between guilds, once they can actually see these things happen before their eyes, I think that's really going to give them that, damn, let me try this game out. Because like I I've seen everything, it looks really appealing, but my fear is I'm going to go in there and it's like you said, it's just going to be a gang fest, you know. And I really feel that if they can do that, maybe they'll only launch with 1 million players, but I feel like it can go to 1.5, 2 million, 3 million, you know, who knows, depending, because the other problem with other MMOs is they literally last a week, 2 weeks, and everyone's max level, everyone's waiting for raids, dungeons, or whatever. But then you have Ashes of Creation where Steven is saying, yeah, you're going to level from 1 to 50, and it's going to take you anywhere between 4 to 6 hours every day for 45 days. And this is something that Steven has doubled down on. And what other MMO takes that kind of time commitment in today's day and age? You know what I mean? So I feel like if we can really get those things nailed and tested, I don't know, I think the casual will be afraid of Ashes, but then they'll come around. Like, what do you...
I mean, that's the place where the super web of systems might be a detriment, right? Because if I log in or I'm watching somebody stream, I want to be able to understand what's happening and why it's happening. Like, why didn't you just kill that guy? And it's a simple answer like, oh, he's from my city. Okay, I get that. That's not a big deal. But if it's something complex, if the system made it so that right now he's immortal because he has to come out of this radius before this activates, and then it just becomes harder to follow and you don't understand what's going on. So that's something that we learned as well from our games, where once you understood the systems, it was interesting and fun to watch people play them. But for somebody who didn't understand the systems, it just looked like noise, like numbers and words that they don't know. It's just like a soup of nonsense. So here, you want to make sure that the systems don't get so complicated so that it makes sense. But you're absolutely right that I think that I have a game, I forget the name of it, I think it was called Nova Empire, that I played that was a very, very simple mobile game. That was a spaceship fleet game. And in that game, everything had time or money involved in all of your resources, similar to Eve. And so basically you had a guy that was in this planet and I'm in this planet. We're not allied. In fact, we might be enemies. We don't mess with one another. If the guy sent his little ship to mine this planet that I wanted, I know that if I attack that, if I go and take out that miner, I'm declaring war on him. Even though there's no official war, he's going to attack my ship next time it's at a dock or whatever. So you just don't do it. So you just have this, respectful neighbors kind of feeling, because there is that risk and loss. But sometimes if they do the thing or it's bad enough, it's time to throw down, and you're going to throw down a month's worth of gain to destroy this guy and eliminate him from the system, and now it's your system. So That kind of feeling is absolutely pivotal, and it needs to be legible to the casual for this to happen. For exactly the person who's like, I don't know about Ashes of Creation. I've heard of it before, but it's not for me. And then they see it and they go, oh, it's respectful. Like people are actually getting along, and you only actually kill people when there's a reason. That'd be great.
No, for sure. And I think the other thing too is the server identity that potentially can occur and ripple throughout all the different kinds of servers. You may have a very asshole server that's filled with degenerates and people just naturally killing each other, but then that's also a good thing for the people who love that kind of gameplay. But then let's say you have another server that where all the role playing's happening, right? Like it's a very dominant role playing kind of Lord of the Rings style server. That'll also cater to a whole bunch of other different players where there's not a lot of, like you said, like it's kind of like more of the friendly neighbor kind of approach, and there isn't a lot of open world killing. But then you have other servers that are like very end game oriented, and that's the thing that I find so appealing with Ashes is the fact that there could be these literal identified servers that it's like if you're looking for a certain kind of gameplay, then you know this server's the server for you, or this server's the server for you. And the fact that there's literally going to be YouTubers that are going to do sort of like Channel 3 news style Ashes updates on servers and what kind of servers they are, what's going on, who's declaring war on a node. I think that's interesting. I think that's going to be really fun. And I think this game really lends itself to opening and creating content where other MMOs just really fail at from day one. That there's not any kind of gameplay that I can construct as a streamer to do for my, you know, for the people watching my stream and actually have like something like a mount off or, you know, transmog competition that Asmongold does, you know, like those kinds of things. But there can be a whole bunch of different things. Can you imagine the very first node war between two large streamers? That's going to be huge. Like, it's like people completely underestimate the kind of thing that if Tim the Tapman, you know, and Asmongold and both of their huge guilds are going to start going at it, and it's all going to be recorded. That's just going to be just as big as any esport tourney of like, you know, that's going to happen. So I think there's a lot of things that I'm really, really excited about. But again, I think there's also a lot of things that are very worrisome. And I do want to talk a little bit about the whole keep it simple, stupid thing that I hear a lot of developers say that. And when it comes to systems, especially as system driven as Ashes is, how much can they keep it simple with these systems to where it only takes like a sentence or two to basically understand what's going on?
You know, it's difficult to say because if you talk about something like Civilization, the game, you know, it's got very complex systems. They are intelligible once you're within that system, but it's kind of hard to explain. And it's not going to be a sentence. It's like an indoctrination. You have to go into the system and then start understanding what the benefits of all of these perks are and policies and things like that. So I don't think that they can even go for that at this point, and it's never been their goal. I wouldn't even suggest it. They've always been systems first, right? But the idea is just the way that, and that's why I brought it up, is the caravan system is something that's immediately intelligible, right? It's just, I want to take goods from point A to point B. And so that should be something that is as easy as I'm going to grab items, and if instead of putting them in my backpack, I have a donkey and a cart, I put it in the cart, I get on the donkey or whatever, and I just walk to the other point. And then I just take them out of the cart and I put them in there. But we've seen that that's not how it's going to work. And the reasons behind this is to try to avoid the ganking right outside of the city gates, the loss of, maybe it was like, I wanted to tell you, oh yeah, give me your gold and I'll take it to the city, and I'm really just taking it to my freehold or whatever. So that's why there's like an insurance or escrows or things like this, so that you can't do those simple exploits. So you just start complexifying things to get rid of basically what are going to be common exploits. That is exactly the thing that's going to be hard to balance, because you're still going to have exploits. Like, for instance, what we just discussed. Can you kill a countryman? By all accounts, yes. Can a countryman step into the line of your AoE spell and die on purpose to give you corruption naked? I don't know.
We don't know.
That's an exploit, right? That's a possible exploit. So how do you avoid that? These are things like where at some point you just have to go, this guy is a problem, report him, like he was talking about the lazy peons RMT question.
Right.
Sometimes you just need for there to be a judge and a jury and people to say that guy's being a jerk and he's exploiting the game, and that's how we're going to prevent that exploit, instead of adding a bunch of systems. Now, something like camping a caravan, or the path that a caravan would take, seems like something that isn't really even an exploit. That's kind of standard op, like the highwaymen sort of thing. So that's when the guilds and the countrymen and things like this would come in and say, protect the roads. You got to protect the roads from the highwaymen if we want to have stuff, if we want to build up things and everything. So how much will that be handled through systems, and how much will it be handled through organic, player-driven interaction? That's the question. And I would say it's safer and easier to lean towards player interaction, but it is better if you can handle it perfectly to combat the simple exploits with systems, to reduce the number of exploits from 10,000 to 10. You see what I'm saying?
For sure.
There's no easy answer there, and they know there's no easy answer. It's just a matter of how you're going to balance it, and at the end of the day, are the systems that you created good or not?
Well, for sure. And the other thing I think of, like, to kind of counter my own question is, Path of Exile. Path of Exile has, a pretty complex class system with a bunch of different options.
Yeah.
And, hell, I think even EverQuest 2, right? Isn't there like 136 different combinations of classes or something to that effect?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to say this, like, you have those kinds of games with that kind of complexity, but yet they do have a very, very loyal player base that is willing to go and watch an hour YouTube video of, like, how to get the perfect class or the class that I am interested in. How do I make it? How do I understand these things? Mm-hmm. So do you think there is also, like, another kind of group of people that, wouldn't want that kind of a simple one or two sentence system, and, would want something more complex?
Well, I always talk about this when we're discussing game design. Again, it's another, like, lesson hard learned, where you're going to want to make a complex system inviting initially. So let's say you have a very nice house that you want to show to people, and there's many, many rooms and everything. Start with setting up a very nice welcome mat and a very nice front door. Get them through the door, and then you get them into the foyer, etc.
We had some difficulties where Triple B is out right now. It is raining really bad, so his power flashed, cut him off. So let's just get back to the discussion. We were talking about, the complexity of, like, other games similar to, like, EverQuest 2, Path of Exile, and you were going on about something and got cut off.
Yeah. Okay. I think I was talking about the way that you want to invite people into the complexity.
Right.
So I was saying it was a metaphor of putting down, like, a welcome mat when you're inviting people into your house, right?
Right.
And so the idea here is, if the initial amount of systems that you have to comprehend to even get excited or understand the game are such that it's just unwelcoming, people won't come into your establishment. So you want it to be simple up front. So if I tell you in something like Path of Exile, the customization options are really complex. Okay, but do you start that way? Do I have to make the decisions right up front? No, I would enter, I'm just swinging at, whatever, a goblin or whatever, and then you slowly ease your way into the complexity. And usually it's going to be the decision of, like, plus 5% crit, plus this movement speed, whatever. So as long as you make the decisions and the just kind of grading into the slope into the game comfortable, then you're okay with the complexity. If it's hitting you all at once, or if it's just a barrier to entry, then it's not okay. So it just depends on how I think Ashes of Creation's systems interplay with one another. How much of it do you need to understand up front to really enjoy the game?
Right. And I think this goes back to an earlier point, right? Because you were talking about the teens in, like, World of Warcraft, and how people, they were just quitting, you know what I mean? Because the game wasn't complex, but it was boring. It was not fun for a lot of people just to hit one button, and the gameplay was really slow, or, whatever the case is. I feel like for Ashes, I'm right there with you, where I think the first 10, maybe even possibly 20 levels are probably the absolute most crucial to get to be fun.
Yeah.
And here's my thing, and I know we did talk a little bit about the whole fun factor, but I feel like some development companies, you made a space shooter RPG.
Sure.
Like, how would you feel if you had a developer that made a space shooter RPG that's never ever played the genre at all, and they just decided to make that game? That's how I feel a lot of MMO companies are. They're making MMOs, but they themselves aren't players, and they're just doing it to catch on to another cash cow. And
Like New World.
you said it, I didn't, but I mean, but basically, yes. I mean, it's one of those things where I see Steven and his passion for MMOs, and then he's also hiring on people who are just as passionate about MMOs as he is. And I think that's what really gives me hope that we can not just have good endgame play loops, but also an actual attractive starting experience. Because I think especially in a PvX kind of game, where just knowing that there's PvP there, I feel like there needs to be a way to experience Ashes uninterrupted by players. You know what I mean?
Here's the thing, and I think you brought this up before, and
Mhm.
it was basically the interesting point being that Steven is not allegedly a PvP player.
Yeah,
So
he's not, no.
that's actually kind of a good sign in the sense that this
Right.
is the envisioning of how the B value of a world is created through PvP, but still maintained in a way that possibly a person who doesn't just want to go on and have an aggressive fight with somebody right away would enjoy the world. So that level of complexity is good. In the case of something like New World, which I want to say, like, I've actually enjoyed the 30 levels that I've played so far. I know
for sure.
that might be it's actually been like, I don't know how many hours, 14 hours. It's a decent game. So I don't want to knock it at all.
No,
but
for
what
sure.
I'm saying is
They are making it better.
Yeah,
upgraded patch.
I played it only recently, and it's because it was on discount, and they're going to have an expansion, so I figured I'd give it a go, and I liked it so far. But the point being that if Steven and company are creating a game that is designed to preserve the experience of the Game of Thrones fantasy for the player who doesn't necessarily want to go punch people in the face, that is going to result in exactly the B value that I've always been talking about and people have been looking for, which is to say people value and when he talks about risk and reward, this is kind of interesting, at least with Lazy Peon. He's actually talking about making sure that people value the accomplishment, right? So like you can't just buy your loot, real money, with real money transactions. So that idea of like the guy who's sitting on the throne, like people look at that and go, that's an actual accomplishment. He actually did that. That is very, very meaningful, because if it doesn't mean anything, like if it just means like, oh, that's the person who last won the battleground, not a big deal, right? And you're not going to brag about it. You're not going to make a video about it. It's not going to be the Game of Thrones who won the last battleground. It doesn't matter. And it's temporary. So that's my hope for it, and that's where I hope that it's going is in that direction of establishing the best B value we've seen in an MMO.
For sure. And I think that's the other reason why I said that Steven isn't a PvP player is because I feel like he's looking at it from the lens of someone who doesn't engage in PvP that often and would think, well, I don't like it when I'm just interrupted by my gameplay, all the time. Like, there needs to be certain barriers. And again, I feel like there are a couple of my friends that when I do explain, like I can show them like the first Lazy Peon video, like the 2020 Lazy Peon video, and then go into further thing about corruption, about like how certain gameplay loops aren't going to be the way they're envisioning from like the titles that they are used to. They kind of like are like, oh, well, that's interesting, and I usually get more of an optimism than a pessimism. But again, I do have a lot of people that are very casual in nature, you know what I mean? And then we also talked about like, well, who is a casual? Like what kind of people are we trying to get to play Ashes of Creation? Because you can have a person who claims to be a casual that's doing mount farming, profession stuff, but they're doing that 10 hours a day, and they'll consider themselves a casual. But then you can have someone who's playing, like 2 hours, but when they play for those 2 hours, it's in the hardest bit of content in the top brackets of like arena or like the top levels of rating, and then they'll go off and not play till next week again, you know what I mean? So I feel like for casuals, like I'm just trying for them to see the kind of B-roll gameplay loops that they can go in, like if they're really into crafting and gathering, like how is that in Ashes of Creation? What is Steven and the team envisioning for that kind of a gameplay loop? Because I think that is a very popular gameplay loop, especially because Ashes is going to be very economically driven. I think probably more economically driven than a lot of other MMOs, because it's like Steven said, crafters are going to create the best shit. The direct quote from him. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be incentivized to, pick up a profession and kind of go with it. So how do you think the crafting system, like, how do you think that's going to actually be played out? Or how would you like it to be played out?
Well, the interesting thing about me is, like, I've played a lot of MMOs with crafting, and I've never really that much enjoyed crafting myself.
Me too.
Okay.
Me too.
So, like, the reason I don't like it is simply because it just adds like another step between getting the loot from the raid or the boss or whatever, because now you're getting the fang or
Right.
the stone. The nice thing about it is that you can take that stone and turn it into exactly the thing you needed,
Right.
rather than just having to wait for the drop.
Right.
So that's cool. But other than that, I feel like it gets monotonous pretty quickly. However, again, with New World and how I envision that it could possibly work in Ashes of Creation, it's resource gathering that also really matters. So if you say, we want to build a castle, we need a lot of stone, okay, and we need wood, and we need all these things. So going to get that stuff is the quest. It's like that's
the thing,
chore sort of thing. So that's a little bit different. Now, the actual crafting system itself, as far as like the interaction, I don't know if there'll be mini games involved or anything like that. I don't, like I said, I'm not the right player to ask for that, because I just don't find the value in it that much, unless the mini game were really fun. I've never experienced that.
Neither have I.
It's just going to be repetitive, and a lot of times what you'll see is that you'll have the crafter just like have to churn out like 15 swords to get the one sword with the 2 traits that you needed or something like that. It's just not fun for me. I had the idea once because I was just thinking about it, really, not that we were going to develop an MMO, that if I wanted to create something that was compelling to me, because one of the main things also that breaks down immediately is just the fact that everybody knows the right recipes by just looking online, immediately know what the sword of the meta is. So you're going to go get those ingredients, put that sword together. If it takes you 15 tries or 20 tries or whatever, but that's the one that you're going for. And everybody can be everything, et cetera, et cetera. I thought it'd be interesting to, the way that like procedural things work, Doug? You know what a seed is in a game?
It's seed?
Like a seed, yeah. It's just like a number. Like, think of it as a number, right?
Okay.
And you feed that number into some kind of an algorithm that processes it.
Okay.
And it's just the way that randoms are determined. Normally, the random that you query when you're developing something is just actually your clock. It's the clock of the computer, right? So there's no actual randoms. You can't ask the computer to do anything random. You're actually only using a very specific time frame, which will appear random to you. And then you run it through an algorithm. So you can't actually say, computer, give me a number, any number. The computer goes like, what are you talking about? Like, I can't do that. I need to know what number you want. Like, you need to be specific. So I say, okay, well, what's your time right now? And so, maybe this has changed with like quantum computing or some other AI stuff that I don't know about, but that's how most game developers are doing it. So what you can do is you can have a seed that is tied to you, to your player. And it's like your UID or whatever, right? Your user ID. And so that UID would have some kind of input into the algorithm of crafting. So that basically you are, in essence, going to have a set of unknown attributes or talents that you can find as you begin to crafting. So you turn out to be the best cobbler in the world or whatever, or you can make the best fancy hats with a plume or whatever. And so you become known for that. And so you would go into the crafting system and you'd always be able to create most of the good stuff, but you'd become a virtuoso of something and find different recipes that are tuned to you differently. And that would be done through some kind of system. Because I've always found that the worst part about crafting, because the fun is like trying to think like, how can I create the best weapon? Well, you just go and the wiki, and that's how I do it. The end. so for me, that would be the fun in crafting. But like I said, I'm not the right person to ask because I don't really enjoy it.
No, for sure. And the one thing I look at when it comes to New World, right? Because I think the one thing that a lot of people really advocate for in that game is the professions. I think that they say a lot of the professions are really, really good. The gathering is really, really good. The only thing that I think of about the gathering is that the only reason why I believe, now this is something I've not done, just to kind of preface this, but when I see people, is the fact that it almost feels like an endless Easter egg hunt. Because whenever you go into the world, you can pick up everything. You can be all the professions at the same time. So everything is literally relevant to your character to pick up. In Ashes of Creation, I don't think it's going to be that way. Like, I don't think there's going to be like this vast thing of gatherables just waiting for you to pick up and pluck from the ground. I don't think it's going to be that. The other thing too that I see a lot of people really talk about when it comes to some of the gathering, let's say like lumberjacking, is the sounds. Like whenever you're hitting against the wood, that's the sounds, the way the tree falls, the way the whole sound design is in that game. That it's very simple. All you're doing is right clicking and you start chopping. It's not a mini game or anything like that. And I think to a lot of people, it's very relaxing. And again, that's why there is an entire population of people that really enjoy just the whole right click meta. Go in, you can have like a whole podcast, hopefully the 1v1 podcast on your other monitor while you're listening and playing New World and just chilling, you know what I mean? And I think that's totally fine. And I think that there's other kinds of professions or gathering things that you can do that can have a little bit of a mini game to where you have to kind of interact with it a little bit more, like fishing, maybe even farming, the animal husbandry system, you know, that I think would be totally acceptable. But the one thing that I fear is because you're going to have to really niche super early on in Ashes, if you just want a lumberjack and you're not coming across any trees, but then you see a herb, you see mines, you see all these other gatherables that you can't pick up, it's going to feel really bad. So I guess for me, my whole thing is that, you know, depending on what land masses we go into, what starting zones we go into, like the Riverlands looks to be a really excellent zone for trees. You know what I mean?
Sure.
A lot of trees and everything like that. The other thing that I really love that I think a lot of people don't like right now, but I think they will, is the fact that there's going to be trees that aren't choppable in the Riverlands. And I personally love that because who wants to go into a deforestation Riverlands? You know what I mean? Where you pop into the game and there's like everything's just cut, like this kind of corporatized version of you know
what it ends up being in a game like New World where you can chop down any tree sort of thing is that they just respawn like in
quickly.
Seconds, you know? So it's just like you chop it down, you go get this other tree, turn around and it's back, you know? So I don't know. I feel like, to me, I play World of Warcraft where you have to choose your gathering and crafting skills, and I've played games like New World and of course New World where you don't. And I think that gathering is something I wouldn't restrict. If it was up to me, I wouldn't restrict it. I'd say go and do it. Now, if you're not going to focus in on it, like in New World, like you try to go get a very difficult thing that you can't mine, you can't do it. So you'd have to go mining a lot before you can mine that thing. So you still specialize just naturally. And they have the same thing with weapons and things like that. But what I was talking about is more like the actual construction of things, the crafting element. So if that crafting is something that you actually have to choose, which again in New World I don't think you have to, but you sort of do by where you're going to put your time into.
Right.
So if you're going to focus in, and that's what it seems like it's going to be in Ashes of Creation, that you're going to focus in on becoming the best shipwright, the best blacksmith, the best whatever. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, how do you differentiate yourself from another blacksmith, from another shipwright? Is it just that you have a better guild feeding you better stuff? And so that's why I said, like, that's one of the things I don't really like about crafting, or why it doesn't call to me, is because there's no way to be better. And when people ask me, what does it mean to be hardcore? I said competitiveness, right? And what I mean by competitiveness is I don't mean like it has to be PvP. It can be PvE, but it just means like I'm trying to be the best shipwright I can be. I'm not just being a lumberjack. I want to be the best lumberjack.
Right.
Can I be the best lumberjack? Is there such a thing? And if not, then it's casual. And if I can, then it's potentially hardcore. You may still not approach it that way, but it has the potential. How will crafting be hardcore? I don't know. It seems to me, and it almost always is just who's got the most resources. period.
For sure. And to kind of like sort of wrap up our conversation, I do want to talk about your latest video on, you know, Ashes of Creation's map size being tripled, and is that necessarily a good thing?
Right.
So for me, like, I am of two different minds about it, because again, I get my hype hat on as like a player, and then I get my content creator, like, more logical hat on that kind of worries me, because it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to triple the landmass, and we already knew at 480 squared kilometers is pretty big. And then to also say we're tripling the world size, but we're also simultaneously keeping the 8 to 10 possibly concurrent player base, like, on a server, that worries me. So can you talk a little bit about, like, you know, your video a bit, you know, maybe people that haven't watched it, then that probably do need to go and watch it because it's really good. So
I would say the next video that I'm putting out is also going to talk about that a little bit. I've actually had a little bit of illumination from playing New World and seeing how the feeling works. I think that they've played New World a lot, to be honest with you. I think that Ashes of Creation people are maybe even forced to be, you know, playing this game because it has so much of very similar things.
No, for sure.
The node-based things, the POIs to resources to all this.
Right.
So I think that it's a really good thing to try out if you wanted to know how it's going to feel. They said that most of the expansion is in the water. So first off, that just basically means that it's going to be a little bit harder to be a pirate, actually, because I know that they were really excited. It's pirate time and everything. Well, that means that they can circumvent your pirate blockade much easier if there's more water. So I don't know if that was a good thing for people who wanted to be pirates, because other than that, it would have been like basically the oceans are like glorified rivers, you know, but now the oceans are going to be expansive. So I don't know how that's going to play out for pirates. But what I do see is that it's going to have the feeling of, hopefully, as I said, this preservation, organically, if not systematically, of risk and reward, where there's a safe space and there's a nice buffer. Because if there's not a nice buffer, if it's literally, and this happens, unfortunately, in New World, where it's like level 9, level 34. Right here. This ruin, level 34, this thing's level 9. If I go this way, if I'm just backtracking and running away, I've run into a level 34 thing, it kills me instantly. So in this case, it's player. So in this case, if I'm here with my countrymen, they don't want to kill me. They're you know, fans of my lumberjacking. They want me to bring in wood. Versus like now my city's here, and here's the bad guy. He sees me lumberjacking, and he's just going to shoot an arrow across and hit me. You know, so that you want to have enough space so that caravans feel like you're actually going from point A to point B, but also that you're not just next to the enemy. That's going to be super critical to get the feeling of risk and reward to be natural, where you're going towards enemy territory and you're in your own home base. And so, as like a spoiler for the videos, one of the things that I suggest is that in these borderlands, that the rare resources can be boosted, in essence, by conflict. So you create these hotspots through PvP conflict. They flare up. You see them in your tactical map. You would see it in the map, say 5%, 10%, 50, 20% resource gain here. So you go out there for a reason. Like, you're not just going out there for no reason at all. You'd go out there to gain more rare resources, but you know that you're going into a place that has conflict in it. And then these things would ebb away so that you're not permanently hotspotting an area. And that way you're getting people to go out there. You want there to be the PvPers who are serious about PvPing, being in a place organically and for a reason in the world, PvPing, that's not just always sieges and things like that. What does it feel like? Why would you ever shoot somebody in the hills? You know, why would you kill somebody down by the river? It's because they're mining gold. And that's how you do it. You just push it into these borderlands and you keep the safe spot, like, you know, just chopping wood right outside your house. That's my theory on it anyway.
Well, I mean, and again, I think, and especially, like, I really do hope that depending on how great their back end is with their networking side, I feel like 15K concurrent feels, at least in this world size, way better. Potentially even 20K. Again, this is a huge world. Like, people aren't gonna realize how big it is until we really go inside of it, because I've heard Asmongold talk about it, because it's not going to feel really great when you have a huge world like this and you feel like you haven't seen a person like run by you in like an hour and a half, because the world's just that massive. And again, I feel like with this game too, there's going to be pockets of concentration that are going to happen in like certain spawn nodes or whatever, like when people spawn in like level 1, and there's going to be 4 different areas, and then all the other areas are going to feel a little bit dry, because there's certain hot spots. That's my number one concern. And again, I feel like it's a very short-term problem, right? Because people are going to be leveling, they're going to be trying to explore, go to different spots of the map or whatever. But I really hope like at least 5 months in, that when people are in other areas or other different sectors of the map, that it feels lively. There feels to be construction going on. But I don't know, like especially if they say like 8K.
Well,
I don't know.
So that's why I say that it's very important to do these things where there are these sort of roving hotspots, because then if you want that means you're probably going to go into a zone of conflict, as in there's going to be competition there, even if it's not seemingly competitive for any reason. If there are just resources, and there's been times in many games, I'm sure, that you've been running towards a node and some guy shows up right before you and you're like, oh man, if I could just headshot this guy.
Right.
So like just the fact that you're having a flare up of like resources, points of interest, treasure chests, whatever it might be that's there to incentivize people, that's where you go if you want to see people, if you want to see lively player versus player or player interactions. Let's just leave it at that.
Right.
But you can go into the woods where there is nobody and feel, because that's also fun, to feel like you're alone in the woods. And if you do see somebody out there, okay, now it's like, what's going on? Is this guy friend or foe, et cetera, et cetera? It makes it feel organic, like the way that it would feel, hopefully in real life. And so that's what I'm hoping for, and that's why I think they're making the world the size that it is, because that's essential to preserve that.
Right. And again, I'm not I guess for me, it's just my whole worry is like, what the density of the servers are really going to feel.
That's what I'm saying, is I guess that they have crunched the numbers on those numbers.
For sure.
So if they haven't, and if it's just restricted based off code, I don't think so. These guys are pretty good at what they do. I think the Planet side is probably some of the better net coding I've ever seen. So, it's good stuff. There's a good back end, it seems. And the worry is, of course, that unless there is some way of restricting it, which I don't know if there will be, and it would be completely synthetic if it did happen, you can't stop people from compressing into a node. So if you're, you've heard like it's 500 versus 500 now, or whatever it might be, that they've said, you can't stop that from happening organically. Like there could be that, and in fact, we do that in World of Warcraft to specifically craft zones to prevent people from accomplishing things back in the day.
Oh, for sure.
And so, like how you're going to stop that? Well, if you have 20,000 people, 30,000 people, whatever, into the server, and it gets bigger and bigger, you increase the chances of that occurring.
No, for sure. And again, like I understand there's a balance. I guess for me, it's really hard to put on like a player hat, because players would want 100,000 people in a server, right? Like, I know Asmongold talks about a lot of times of just like just popping everybody in the server, making it feel so lively and thing. But you're very, very right, because there's sometimes too where something can feel way too populated. Like I always think of expansions in World of Warcraft that launch, and everybody's trying to get the same node types or creature types or quest type things, and you're just like, oh my god, like this is so annoying, because everybody's doing the same things you're doing, and
it's a stream of players from point A to point B.
Right. And it's
not immersive at all.
Yes. And it can get very, just like annoying. So like I do understand that whole dichotomy of wanting to feel like, hey, I'm in this forest, it's just all mine, like I have all these things to do, and I totally get that. I want it to feel like a very happy medium. But I think of course we'll go into that in Alpha 2, and we'll test the crap out of it and everything like that. And just did you get Alpha 2 access?
Not yet.
Okay. Are you considering testing in Alpha 2, or you want to just kind of?
And I've signed up for the creators, content creators program. But other than that, I'm gonna see how this game I'm about to release is gonna do. If I'm gonna drop like $500 on it.
No, for sure. I think you could drop like, I think $375 now, so it's not the $500 anymore,
Cheap.
but it's not cheap. No, for sure. But
I waited until New World was half off.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a frugal gamer.
No, dude, I think, again, you have to be a pretty passionate individual for Ashes to get it this time. But I also really appreciate Steven's whole view on it too, where it's just like, hey, if you're cautiously optimistic about it, just don't purchase anything. He's like, just wait to see the kind of stuff you see on people's streams. Watch people watch it. If you like what you see, then you can always try to come in. And again, I like that approach. I mean, you can kind of see the kind of genuineness that Steven is trying to really bring with his game because of all of the bureaucracy that happens now in a lot of the corporatized companies that MMOs do nowadays.
For sure.
But Enrique, dude, thank you so much for having this talk with me, man. I really, really appreciate it because I am a huge fan of just your approach when it comes to gaming, the way you analyze certain things when it comes as a developer. It's really, really insightful, and I really think your channel's like really special. I think you're gonna blow up, man. Like, seriously.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, and I'm also a fan of your content. So, obviously, I don't have to tell people watching this video to subscribe to you, but
I try, man. I feel like I'm just a passionate gamer. Like, I'm just doing what I can for the space. I mean, I really do love the Ashes community. I think they're I don't know, man. Like, I think I've been super invited and super welcomed in this community. So I'm just kind of just trying to give back, and also just to give people like these kinds of insights into certain content creators' minds, give them a platform to really discuss. And I know there is a lot of other podcasts out there. I feel like mine's a little unique because, especially like with what you have to say, I feel like what you have to say is very important. And another podcast where there's 5 other people, it's really hard to get your perspective in a long kind of format where we can really get your point across, and you're not feeling, well, there's 5 other people here, I should give the short version, instead of like the more detailed one that I think people are looking for. So,
yeah, well, almost every answer worth having is complex. So it's
very true.
Right. So I like the one-on-one podcasts myself. I listen to many of them. So.
Oh yeah, no, me too. But again, Enrique, thank you so much. And if you can mention again just the kind of games that you have available on Steam, I am going to put the links in the description below. So if you want to go and play these games, I'm going to go and purchase them myself because I really want to play this space shooter RPG one myself. So go ahead.
It's best with a controller. That one's called Ring Runner, Flight of the Sages. And then we have there you go.
Yeah.
Then we got Pop-Up Dungeon, and the new one is called Aces and Adventures, and it's going to be out early next year. I think you can actually still order it on BackerKit.
Okay.
Pre-order it and get access to the beta.
Sweet. Well, again, will have all of those links down below, along with Enrique's YouTube channel, which is TripleBTitles. Again, go check out his content. He does a lot of very analytical approaches when it comes to MMOs, Ashes of Creation, other games and stuff. Again, I am your host, Vlhadus. That is Enrique from TripleBTitles. This is the 1v1 podcast, and we will see you guys on the next one. Later, guys.